In the last few years or so, a new phrase has kind of worked its way into our lexicon, especially in our online lives. And that phrase is thoughts and prayers. I'm sure many of us have either seen it typed in a comment box on Facebook, or some of us may have even typed it ourselves. When we see something happening that isn't exactly positive, we respond, thoughts and prayers. And a lot of people have a problem with that. A lot of people have a problem with that phrase and how we use it in our lives. And I'll be honest with you, some of them probably have a fairly serious complaint, because there are a lot of people who just type that phrase and then move on with their lives. It's somewhat insincere, but for a lot of people, typing thoughts and prayers is a reflection of what they're actually doing inside, which is thinking and praying for the person who's in trouble, for the person who is in need in that moment. And yet there are still a lot of people who have a problem with thoughts and prayers, even when it's sincere, because they feel like thoughts and prayers are somehow a substitute for real action, for actually doing things that can make a difference, as though prayer is not something that could actually make a difference. See, I think the real problem is a lot simpler. The world doesn't want thoughts and prayers because the world doesn't want God involved. Ultimately, prayer is a moment of asking God to get involved in something that's going on, in something that's not right, in something that we need Him for. But there are a lot of people who don't want God involved in our world, and so they discourage prayer as a futile exercise, as something meaningless, as something superfluous. But prayer is anything but a futile exercise. It is anything but superfluous. And in fact, in the gospel today, and in the first reading as well, we are given the path of prayer as one to follow. In the example both of Peter and the early church, and in the example of Jesus himself. You see, the apostles faced an actually very important decision. Judas had betrayed Jesus, and Judas was no longer part of the college of apostles. And yet they still had this mission that Jesus had given them to go out and proclaim the good news and witness to the resurrection and bring that gospel message to all of the four corners of the earth. And so they knew they were going to need someone else. They were going to need someone else, as Peter says, who had been with them from the beginning, who had seen everything that Jesus had done, but most importantly, had witnessed the resurrection from the dead. Had witnessed the fact that Jesus Christ, who had died, remains dead no longer, but lives forever. Now, Peter could have just made this decision on his own. He had the authority. Christ had given it to him on the shores of Galilee after the resurrection. And certainly he had been with Jesus from the very beginning. So if there was going to be anyone who would know all of the different players, all of the different candidates who might have been able to take Judas's spot in the apostles, it would have been Peter. But he doesn't take that decision on himself. He hands it to the church as a whole, because he knows that the church as a whole will do the right thing. They will turn in prayer to God. When you think about it, the humility of Peter and of the early church is absolutely astounding. They're saying, God, yeah, we could make a decision here, but we want to make the right decision. We need your wisdom. Because we know that in our weakness and in our frail humanity, all we are able to see is appearances. And appearances can sometimes be deceptive. So, Lord, we need you. We need your wisdom to come down upon us, to guide us in this decision, because you don't only see appearances, you see deep into the heart. So show us the heart of the one who will join us to proclaim the resurrection. Show us the heart of the one with whom you have entrusted your message of salvation for the world. The humility of Peter and the early church is astounding. And Jesus himself, we know Jesus prayed. The Gospels tell us that time and time again, that Jesus would withdraw by himself to a quiet, secluded place to pray. But now, in this moment, the veil is pulled back. And we're not just told that Jesus prayed, we're actually given a glimpse into the content of his prayer. And what is the content of Jesus' prayer? It's us. Jesus is in the final hours of his earthly life. He's about to give himself over to be crucified on the cross. And in these final impending hours before his own death, what does he think about? He thinks about us. He prays to the Father for us, that the Father might continue to protect us, that the Father might continue to be involved in the world, that we might come to know that Jesus' presence on earth doesn't end in the moment that he ascends to the Father, but that his intercession, his care, his mercy, and his presence continues to dwell among us, and that he lives forever to intercede for us before the Father. He trusts the Father. He trusts that the Father will take care of those whom Jesus now has to, in a sense, leave behind. And so if we're called to imitate Jesus, and we are, we have to begin with a life of prayer, with a life of relationship with the Father, with the heart of the Father that is the source of all consolation, that is the source of all hope. And the beautiful thing is that whether prayer is consoling or tepid, whether it's sweet or challenging, prayer is always fruitful. Because prayer opens us up not to our own actions, our own weakened and wounded actions, but it opens us up to the presence of God. And it opens us up to the reality of God's fidelity, of his faithfulness to his people, of the fact that no matter what we've done, no matter what we face, God never abandons us. God is always right there with us, right there waiting for us. And so by this really powerful, intimate, overwhelming act of being in the presence of God, we learn by that very fact what it means to be there for someone else. And so prayer is not this futile, meaningless exercise. It is the ultimate act of humility and trust. It is the assurance that God will send us one more witness to the resurrection when perhaps we have forgotten it in our own lives. It's the confidence that even though Jesus has ascended to the Father, he will not leave us orphans. That he is always going to be involved in my life, even if it doesn't look exactly the way I want it. It's the guarantee that even though the world may not want it, God will always be there when we need it the most.